Welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams D Podcast Record Club, where each week one of us picks a record for the others to listen to, and then we all sit here, we all review it. And this week, we're talking about a special record, my recommended record this week. We're going to be talking about Fallen by Evanescence. And this has been a long time coming. This is honestly, I'm glad this happened, just because this has been on the docket for a long time and it's never budged. Like, it's been ahead of a lot of other records I've picked, but it has remained firmly there because I wanted to talk about this forever. And I consider it to be a sort of unofficial, a member of a trilogy, I guess, in record clubs that we've done, because we also did Linkin Park's Meteora and we also did 3 Days Grace 1X last year. And these three albums feel like they represent a specific part of my musical development. And I'm sure I'm not the only one here, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Morgan, who has listened to a lot of albums like this. And so you kind of, in your head, know what to expect when talking about a song or an album like this. But this one is very special for multiple reasons, including the context surrounding this album, what willed it into existence, the story of the album, and what was made of it, because this is notoriously an album that contains a specific song. This is basically, like, I think 2 songs on here stand out above all of the others as being what this is remembered for. And unfortunately, in order to explain how all of that works, we have to talk about two things I never wanted to talk about, that being emotional abuse and Daredevil. And so here's the deal. Back in the 2000s, back way even before this album was recorded, we have frontwoman of Evanescence, we have Amy Lee. Amy Lee has been a musical prodigy ever since she was a child. She listened to stuff like Björk. She had incredibly eclectic music taste. And overall, she was just like a prodigious musical talent. And as myth tells it, I don't really think this is necessarily true, but it's at least a rumor or a story that she met guitarist of Evanescence, Moody, believe during a summer camp stay in their childhood while she was playing something on the piano. I think it was actually a song by Meatloaf, at least according to this particular myth or rumor. I think it was the second Meatloaf. Riley, help me out here. What's that fucking song? If I could do anything, that the song?
I would do anything for love, but I won't do that.
Supposedly, Ben Moody came in on her singing this song, and then the two became sort of a musical pair. And basically they recorded lots of early demos and music in their like late teen, early 20s. And sort of, their musical influences were, a little bit more far reaching than stuff from this kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of post-grunge butt rock era. It went far beyond that. What they wanted to make was something that was way more along the lines of like gothic metal, which is not unprecedented in this time period. A lot of music sounded like this. A lot of music came from it. But the problem is that Amy Lee was very much of this project. And the only way that they could get any kind of substantial musical backing from the industry at this moment was to infuse it and dilute their sound, to include like a rap metal kind of thing, to include a component in their sound that wasn't originally there, just because, nu metal was really, really big at the time. And that wasn't really exactly what they wanted to do. And eventually they kind of had their big moment, and they were just like given the opportunity of, look, we're going to have this singer from, I think he was actually a Christian like rock outfit band, which again kind of ties this into some of the other stuff that we've covered. But he was the frontman of that, and he had to come in and do the rap kind of feature on Bring Me to Life. And they were basically given an ultimatum. It was just like, we can do it with the song and we can do this, or you don't get to make any music. And they packed it up. They went home. They're like, well, that was our only shot. And then they were kind of demoralized. And so when the label came back to offer them more time, they were like, fuck it, let's do it. So they did. and they included the feature on their song that they didn't originally want, as well as the inclusion of a producer for the front man who was featured on that song's band producing their album. And it came in tow with a package deal in that these songs were going to be in a movie. They were going to be part of a movie soundtrack because they were big, that kind of stuff. That's sort of like I'm pretty sure this is post Spider-Man and the Nickelback single kind of idea. So they were thinking something kind of like that. They're like, oh, that was successful, do this. And then they did. They used two songs. They used Bring Me to Life, and they used, it was My Immortal, right? It was the other song.
I think so.
So they used those two songs in the Ben Affleck Daredevil film, a movie that I actually hate more after being more well-versed in what this was all about, just because of association. And basically these two singles, particularly Bring Me to Life, absolutely exploded. They became so popular. They were released before Daredevil came out, but once the movie premiered, just absolute cash raking in ridiculous. I think it's probably even more successful than Spider-Man. I don't have the numbers on that, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if it were. And so basically you have that. But the problem is that there's also the rest of an album that is attached to these two singles. So my kind of logic here was trying to examine what is not divorced from those two singles, but taking them in with the totality of those two singles to see what this album even is. And maybe, perhaps, to give, at least in my opinion, a bit of a lukewarm defense of some of its maybe elements that haven't aged quite as well, but because Amy Lee was given a raw deal from the beginning. All these songs, the sound, this album, this wasn't what she and Ben Moody had originally envisioned. And in many ways, Evanescence was a pioneer for music like this. The reason she struggled so hard because of these labels telling her that, you're a female list in a rock band. People don't want that right now. So she was just repeatedly told over and over again that there was no market for this. Then she came along, these songs broke through, and there was a market for this. I think that we owe the existence of bands like Nightwish to the very success of Evanescence. So it's very, very culturally important for many reasons.
And we won't hold that against Evanescence in this instance. But
no, we won't. But the overall sort of presence of female-led rock bands in the alternative are definitely it's just linked to this inextricably. And there's also just these songs too just have sort of an immense amount of baggage attached to them. So unpacking them, especially people of our age, is just genuinely kind of fascinating. I know August isn't here right now, so I can't talk about one particular part of it. But as for you two, I'm guessing that it's not too far divorced from me, except probably as with Riley, I imagine you probably listened to things that were 10,000 miles from the shit when you were 10 years old. But I'm going to bet and say that Morgan and August is back, that Morgan and August probably have a little bit of a similar experience to me, in that this song came to you at some point. You don't maybe remember when, but maybe it was Daredevil, maybe it was on the radio, maybe it was this or that, but it's this is in your brains. I know it is, and it's laid dormant for so long.
First of all, I just want to say, I resent the implication that I would not have a deep-rooted childhood attachment / relationship.
You were listening to the Chemical Brothers. I
was not divorced from pop culture. Here's the thing you need to understand. I was a gothic kid. I liked dark shit as a kid.
Can't imagine what that's like.
In terms of rock music anyway. So I was I was pretty young when I got into The Cure and all the kind of classic sort of goth rock, goth pop bands. Sure, I wasn't saturated with nu metal and radio rock in the same way that I'm absolutely sure that you all were in the states that you lived in and in the time that you grew up in America.
Not you people.
Yeah, well, hey, you're you people to me. You should know that by now.
What do you mean, you people?
Who people?
So yeah, so I actually I do have a very very strong childhood like memory of hearing this song and of watching Daredevil. So fuck you.
I watched Daredevil plenty of times. That does not mean I still can't hate that movie.
No, for sure. I wasn't defending Daredevil. I was just saying like
So,
I experienced pop culture the same
fair.
as you did.
Fair.
And
Though
yeah,
I want to zero in on one aspect that I'm glad that August is finally joining us, because you weren't here for Linkin Park or 3 Days Grace, which I was very, very sad that was the case, but I feel like there's a redemption here. August, this is a bit of a tangent that's a little bit more difficult to get into once we actually start talking about the album. So I want you to briefly talk to us about why this album is culturally important in terms of things that have nothing to do with the music.
So, animated music videos, for those not familiar with the acronym, were a weird kind of brief flash in the pan of the anime subculture in the early to mid 2000s, where people would create their own original animated music videos to existing, particularly new metal, butt rock, radio rock, however you want to phrase it, songs. And the aforementioned bands were very popular, but one of the granddaddies of this genre was, of course, Evanescence, Bring Me to Life, and My Immortal.
The Citizen Kane of weeaboos, honestly.
Being, oh my God, absolutely. Like, the number of weepy, like, Bleach, My Immortal AMVs you can find are ridiculous, and they're so funny looking back on them in like 480p potato ass quality. You can count the pixels, but it's so interesting because it's representative of a cultural moment that I think has passed for this album. And it's a weird thing because there was a moment when the songs on this record were put in a degree of more seriousness and canonized in a more favorable way than they are today without their meme status. Like, looking back on those AMVs as a time capsule, because what you can see is people who listened to this music without any of the lenses of the kind of memery and mockery derived from songs like My Immortal, and particularly Bring Me to Life. And that's just something that's so fascinating to me, because those are glimpses of a particular cultural reading which is completely lost on new listeners.
Also, I feel like it's awesome that we covered the 3 albums that I talked about beforehand, because this basically means we've covered the holy fucking trinity of these songs, because we've covered Riot from 3 Days Grace's 1X, which is an AMV classic. We have covered Linkin Park's Meteora, which has actually several songs on there that are 100% AMV core, which they actually played into because I believe they got
their power.
Numb. They had studio, I think it might have been Gynax, but they had an anime studio do the video to Breaking the Habit. So that was kind of a genius move on their part, honestly. And now we have Bring Me to Life and My Immortal, which, I mean, they're such angsty teenage songs that they both feel like this was just such a beautiful coalescence of cultural alignments that had nothing to do with each other, but are completely logical in retrospect.
I would say there's only really one kind of major AMV king we're missing, and that's Drowning Pool's Bodies. And
the problem with that is that Drowning
the problem is that we're not going to do it because it sucks ass.
Don't speak too soon. We might sink to those depths one day, but
you know, you're right.
That is a bit of an aside that has less to do with the music and more how this music has evolved with culture. Now I will take a moment to get more into the music itself. All my cards on the table, no shame here. I actually really like this album for a couple of reasons, but the main thing I want to put up front is to say that I do not like this album because of Amy Lee's story, which I didn't elaborate on a little bit more, but basically every single song on this album is very blanketly about a terrible, agonizing, emotionally abusive relationship that Amy Lee was in right before it was made. And the process for her of kind of having this very personal thing become very kind of unintentionally corporatized is obviously something that sucks to see, just generally speaking. But I don't like these songs because, you know, the person who made them suffered. I like these songs because I think they're genuinely good songs. But it is important to say that I think this occupies an interesting space in culture too, because this is often thought of in the same realms as stuff like nu metal. Whereas I'm going to argue and say that I don't think this album's nu metal, like almost inarguably, in my opinion, it's not.
It's
and
gothic
it gets lumped
metal,
in with
if anything. Alt metal with a gothic tinge.
Exactly.
Like,
the biggest problem the album has, in my opinion, is really that it doesn't commit to its own sound. And that's really just because they couldn't have possibly done it because of the producer. The producer was, you know, Christian rock guy who produced albums for, you know, a shitload of bands that would have played on the same radio station as Toby Mac. And so therefore the sort of metal kind of, again, almost Nightwish style grand gothic opera sound that they wanted to go for is something that from the outset they can't really achieve. So it's kind of kneecapping itself. But still, I do think that there is at least a modicum of value in this, no matter who you are.
Yeah, Evanescence out of Nightwish as Radiohead out of Travis.
Morgan, I want to focus in on you just because I know that you are probably the most familiar, at least this as an album, probably as I am. Not to say that I'm assuming anything of you, but I want to know, unfiltered, I want to know what exactly your opinion of this record is. Divorced from all the bullshit, the context, from Daredevil, from Amy Lee, all this shit. What do you fucking think about this album?
I enjoy it pretty well. It has some really strong moments. In particular, Bring Me to Life just fucking goes. Like,
I'm so glad somebody else fucking said it.
Like,
it's a
sometimes
great song.
It's a lot like Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley, in that I do not think the meme would have endured this long if the song itself did not go. Like,
and that's the same as with Numb as well, if we're talking about
precisely
this era too.
It's a great microcosm of the album, really, because it is a song that definitely feels like somebody squeezed a rap metal verse into it for no real reason, which is just, you know, that's indicative of some things. The album in general does sort of have this light stench of too many fucking fingers in the pie, just from the way it sounds alone. Really, like, this could really do with some more grimy typo negative type of bleh, you know, and instead it's very, very polished to put it in the realm of radio rock. And you can tell that the band had greater aspirations than that, and while that's not necessarily a bad thing, being a striving for radio rock, that is, the album just kind of feels at odds with itself at some point.
I think it's worth acknowledging some of the internal turmoil. Obviously, Jake has alluded to some of the internal turmoil that influences some of the lyricism here. And I want to clarify as well, like, I think I agree with Jake that you can read just about all of these songs through that kind of abusive relationship, or at least like psychologically difficult relationship space if you want to. But Amy has said that certain specific songs are about certain specific things that aren't related to that, even if you want to read it through that lens. Another thing I want to bring up, and I tried to do a little bit of research on this, but I don't know if it's ever been outright confirmed. Neither Amy nor Ben Moody, the guitarist of this record, have commented on this. But so Amy and Ben were in a relationship for a certain amount of time. It was an acrimonious relationship. Ben left the band shortly after the release of this record. And I don't know that it's ever been stated explicitly that Ben is the person that these songs are written about from Amy's perspective. So I don't want to act on the assumption that that's true, but there's a decent amount of evidence that that may be true. They certainly were definitely in a relationship, and they certainly, Amy has said that they're not on speaking terms, and that
she said explicitly that Ben was the type of person that she literally could not see being in her life anymore.
Yeah.
So he said I think specifically that he wasn't good for her, I believe was the words that she used.
Yeah, and both of them have been very kind of clear about not necessarily wanting to talk about that very much, and with regard to the band. But when you have this information, at the very least, that there were frictions, then I think it does inform the listening experience of Fallen a lot. And I know that I'm the kind of person who is more influenced by that kind of contextual information than maybe some of you are. But I also think that it's not just like an interesting piece of contextual information. I think it informs a lot of why this record is the way that it is. And it's tied quite intrinsically into how this band came to be, how this band came to find success, and how this band had come to be viewed in the lens of retrospect. And I like what August said about bringing up the certain culture that this album arose out of and the certain cultural things that it inspired, the feeling that this is very much of its time and that it's linked in a lot of ways to memes or, well, those AMVs, I guess, were the 2000s equivalent of memes. The way that it's linked to certain aspects of the culture in that time that now seems super foreign to us in 2022. And that does affect, I think, the way that a lot of rap rock, again, this isn't rap rock, but Bring Me to Life is arguably a rap metal song. Anyway, this affects a lot of the way in which this music is viewed now, not even just Evanescence, but beyond. But Evanescence are in particular a fascinating case because, you know, this was a gothic metal, but very kind of hook-based and radio-friendly band that had a female front person, that had a very clear, strong female drive. And it's worth noting that, yeah, one of the reasons why Bring Me to Life sounds the way it does is that the label forced them to make it essentially as new metal-y as possible to fit in with the aesthetic at the time. I mean, this album came out the same year as Meteora, for Christ's sake. And it was fun. It's funny because I think new metal was kind of dying down a little bit by 2003. Probably, it was more giving way to like that kind of thing that we associate with 2000s post-grunge, like the sort of 3 Days Grace thing was becoming more popular. It was less Limp Bizkit and more like, I don't know, Stained and Creed. But anyway, I believe the producer of this album has actually produced multiple Creed albums, if my memory is correct. It's either that or not a stone's throw away from that. So I'm already seeing the Inevitable Creed Record Club at some point in the future.
No, no. I put my fucking foot down. Okay. No.
Yeah. There's certainly a distinction to be made between that kind of music and this, because I still think that no matter what your thoughts are on an album like this, is that you can 100% see the fact that there is more emotion and frankly artistry here than there is with your dime a dozen grunge bands. That said, it's very easy to see why this does not have a phone revaluation just because of those production weaknesses I talked about. They don't add a lot to the emotional grandeur of the actual thematic content in a way that feels complementary. Like that's, in my opinion, what sets Meteora a notch above this, is that Meteora from the outset was a sound that was designed to be what it was. Whereas this, you know, with a producer that's more adventurous and just talking about the roles that producers have on albums in general and the sort of stranglehold the 2000s producers especially had over people who wanted radio play, this kind of sound is just not something that you want to, you know, make any more unique, because then you're obviously going to lose your appeal. So, you know, all of the maybe ornamental and kind of gothic shit that they could be leaning into is just stuff that overall comes across as a little bit half-baked sometimes. I mean, notably, like, again, you can just look at what Amy Lee's influences are. But while I am making those concessions, I do want to present an argument for at least the vast majority of this record, mainly found in two things. In that I think that if we were going to compliment Meteora for its exemplary frontman, Chester Bennington, we have to compliment Amy Lee, because it's not just about the fact that she was successful and that she struggled not. Amy Lee is a genuinely phenomenal musician. She has an incredible incredible singing voice, which I think gets lost amidst the tides and discourse of this song or that song or just the album in general. It's that she's a great singer. She has so much power, but also can really dial it back and have a lot of really earnest, very bleeding intimacy, which is needed for stuff like this. And the fact that while it doesn't have the heft that it needs, but Ben Moody's guitar work on here is some really fundamentally solid shit. I think, especially on shit like Bring Me to Life, it's that part just goes. And while I won't say that the rap feature helps, I have grown fond of it through years of exposure. The song can be found in a newer form. Amy Lee went back and I think on a solo record actually sort of recorded this in the way that it always meant to be recorded. And it sounds fantastic, but it also doesn't quite have it's more of a ballady kind of thing. This, on the other hand, has a little bit more power and grit. Like, it needs more, sure, and it doesn't benefit from that verse. But the beats of this song are etched into my prefrontal cortex. It would feel wrong if I heard this song any other way than how I hear it, frankly. And this may be my most controversial take yet regarding this album, or just in general. I actually think the best song on here is My Immortal.
Oh, I do too. I agree.
Oh, okay, awesome. I thought I was going to get complete shit for that because
I think it's comfortably the best song here. And I like Bring Me to Life, and I like Going Under, and I like Tourniquet. But
I agree, because My Immortal is one of the songs that benefits from its production because it's not as hard. But also, it's so easy to see why this music and everything in this culture got memed into oblivion and back. But also, there's just, if anything didn't deserve this, it's My Immortal. Like, the fact that this has the most notoriously awful fan fiction of all time written attached to its name because the author of that fan fiction quoted Evanescence constantly, this makes this song dead on arrival for most people, just because the melodrama, they just can't get past it. And look, I am a sucker for this kind of melodrama, but I listen to this song is fucking heartbreaking. I don't think any of it is too out there. It feels reserved when it needs to be. It doesn't feel cheesy, at least to my ears.
Absolutely not. I don't even think it feels melodramatic, really. It's just a dramatic sort of emotional song.
The lyricism is frankly just absolutely astonishing. This woman is bleeding out in front of us, and I just feel like this is something that gets mocked without even really being heard. Like, I get you cannot like it and all of that, but it just feels mean-spirited in the way that a lot of the dismissal of Linkin Park that we talked about kind of felt mean-spirited too. And it's not because these artists went through things, it's just because the work itself is genuinely emotional, and I feel like divorced from its mimetic context, it just wouldn't have this reputation. Just because My Immortal is this tasteful piano ballad that's just again, she's singing her heart out about a situation that you can clearly tell really deeply wounded her. I'm pretty sure she even stated that the inception for some of the songs, particularly Bring Me to Life, was when a friend sat her down to dinner one night and just immediately asked her if she was happy or not. And that's why Bring Me to Life is sort of a song that's about a third party coming in to kind of, again, wake you up so that you can kind of
go
snap
through the
out
open
of it.
doors.
Save me.
It's quite it's quite great the way it works in the album too, because Going Under, which is probably incidentally my favorite of the other big rock songs on this record.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It has that kind of theme of I think Amy has spoken about how it's kind of a song that represents choosing to not fight because it's easier and because the fight would be too painful. And it's I'm going under, and then Bring Me to Life comes in, and it's begging for someone to pull her up from that under state. And it's just a great piece of within the context of the record, that sequencing makes both of these songs hit harder, especially when you have that additional level to it. And also want to shout out on the note of My Immortal as well, a song that's not quite as striking as My Immortal, but has a similar sort of aesthetic, the song Hello, which is a song about when she was 6 years old and she lost, and her 3-year-old sibling passed away suddenly. and the kind of experience of grief through that lens at a young age. I do feel like the song could have been built up a bit more and embellished a bit more, but there's a real tenderness and a real emotion there that I think showcases some of Amy's diversity in the context of the other things on this record as well. She's great at really bringing out the true pain of the experiences that she talks about without rendering it too two-dimensional. Like, you have a bit of kind of flowery, very gothic sort of lyricism, and it does lend a particular tinge, and it's not necessarily like, you know, the most original style of writing in the world, but it perfectly fits her voice. She's just able to find a particular tone that lends a genuine gravity to the words, even when they're not, like, when they're maybe a little bit tiny bit trite on certain songs. And I really appreciate that about her. As a vocalist, I kind of think of her as kind of the midway point between Tori Amos and Lisa Gerrard of Dead Can Dance. It's kind of like both of those singers are evoked in Amy as well. And particularly, I mean, Tori and Amy kind of have similar stories. Both of them were child prodigies. Both of them had a very difficult road to success that was paved with sort of difficulty with men. And
the DNA of
from success.
Amy's music can be found in songs like Crucify, which I think is like, I mean, the pipeline is direct. That song is like, if she covered that song, that would be actually dope as fuck if she covered that song, because I mean, it feels like Evanescence.
Yeah. And shout out as well. I'm not like a huge fan of, I don't think that Ben Moody is definitely solid on this record. His guitar work is definitely fine. I think there's a couple of moments where he really shines. In particular, the closing track here, Whisper, stands out to me in that regard. That's one of the more memorable songs from like a musical standpoint, and he's pretty good in the biggest tracks on here as well, and Tourniquet, which is another deep cut favorite of mine.
I love Tourniquet.
Shouts to that, credit where due. And I think some of those production limitations, which I don't think are as big of a drawback, but are definitely present, I think come through on songs like My Last Breath, which has this very kind of like a slightly clunky bit of like electronic percussive integration into the beat that doesn't really work super well. And it's also like, it fits on the record because this is a song about 9/11, in case you didn't know, like, and about her imagining herself as someone who I'm not exactly sure whether it's someone who's dying in 9/11 or who is like has a relative who dies in 9/11, and it's very much of its time, but it does feel a little bit, how best to describe this, it feels a little bit like,
it doesn't feel like congruent with the rest of it, you know, because the album's really like, I would say that the album is actually, this song notwithstanding, focused to kind of a fault, just because you have songs like Taking Over Me or stuff that like, it just kind of feels a little bit repetitious within the context of the album, because it's like there's some songs that just kind of feel like they do what other songs do, but like a little better. And it like, if you cut maybe 2, potentially 3 songs from this record, I really do think it would be like solid. It would be worthwhile coming back to and like exploring this. But like, I can't deny that it definitely does feel a little flabby, even though I don't actually think I don't think that there's a bad song on here, to be honest with you. I enjoy everything to various degrees. But that said, I don't feel like this has the obvious, like, I mean, it's got a little bit of the cringe, but I also just kind of think that like, yeah, in the ways that I completely anticipate music like this to kind of be that way.
Yeah, and also like, I think even without the additional baggage, there's little moments that are peppered through here that are really distinctly kind of particularly dark. I'm thinking of the song Haunted, which I think very much continues the abusive relationship theme. What's interesting about the song is that apparently it was based on a short story that Ben Moody wrote that Amy then adapted for the lyrics specifically. And I mean, there's a line in the song about being raped. Like, it's really like, and very much the theme continues from Going Under and stuff about being kind of pulled down, and not even just how physical attachments can be damaging, but also how like being able to feel someone's eyes staring at you, or just feel how they feel about you, and that feeling and psychological stuff holding you in place. She has
lots of tactile details in her songwriting that really make you feel all of this shit, in my opinion, at least. And especially like, it's like when fucking not Bring Me to Life. It's like when My Immortal starts, and it's kind of an iconic piano opening, but like her kind of defeated whispered vocals here, just like, and that opening line always took me off guard. Just, I am so tired of being here. And it's just kind of like, you're immediately like,
there's another
tired too, Amy.
There's another detail to My Immortal that I love that I only just recently learned. I'm not sure if they probably re-recorded it for this album, but apparently it was originally released on their I think debut EP Origin, and apparently the original recording of the song, and I'm not 100% sure whether that original recording is the one on this record, although I might assume not, but apparently the original recording of that song was recorded when Amy was 17, and like you have the demo vocal recording that's used in the original version of the song, and like even the pianos are like MIDI, they're not real pianos, and it just has this sort of sense of super fragility to it. And the strings, I think, from what I can gather, were the biggest addition to the version on the album. And I actually think that despite the fact they were added at the insistence of the label, they work really well here. They're a little teensy bit too laboring the emotion, but I wouldn't want them gone completely, I don't think. So it's just a song that comes together beautifully in spite of how sparse it is, and in spite of all of the kind of limitations that are being thrown at Amy and the space that she's in. It's remarkable how well the song endures and holds up today, I think.
Now, for every bit as I want to give this album the credit that's due, because I genuinely do believe that it deserves it. And like I said, I don't dislike anything on here. That said, if there's anybody who can evaluate cringe in a little bit more of a discerning light here, certainly our man August. And, it's important that we don't just, that I not just lavish it with praise without at least raising a bit of a counterpoint here, because obviously this has some notable weaknesses. So I would like for August, for one, to maybe speak to some of these weaknesses that the album undeniably does have and can affect your enjoyment of, just because we might as well evaluate it like everything else, because Amy deserves that kind of evaluation. I wouldn't want to, be all like fluffy and careful to not hurt anybody's feelings, because that's not taking people seriously. And that's just disrespectful.
I just wanted to interject here and say, I love that you're like, okay, it's time to get critical with this album. August, like instead of just asking, August, how do you feel about this record? August, let's tell us all about how this record sucks.
What show do you think this is?
I know, but I'm just saying, like, August might have something positive to say for all we know. Who knows?
I've seen the Rate Your Music ratings. I know.
August, I'm curious, like, just to lead into this discussion, like, what's your, obviously you've talked about the AMVs and stuff, but like, what's your perception experience with Evanescence?
Younger than the rest of us.
And what were you kind of like expecting going into this, and how does it kind of hold up to you as a holistic album now?
I guess going on both of those points of being a bit younger, I was with a lot of things, I was kind of there for the end of it, is how I'd put it. I was there for those waning moments of this song's kind of serious cultural place. And I would say most of my perception of Evanescence has been dominated by them as this joke band who made the song where the guy says, "Wake me up, save me." Like that's where most of my personal cultural perception of this album has come from. And that's just not something I can ignore, because it's just simply the truth of how this has entered my life. And I've been familiar with Bring Me to Life for a long time. My Immortal, I'd say I wasn't as familiar with, because I think Bring Me to Life has obviously really been the ones that the memes have carried and kept alive.
I'm narrowly certain that My Immortal is the first song I ever cried to as a teenager. I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay. That's a beautifully naked admission for an episode like this. I'm glad.
I just have such a vivid memory when I had a golden yellow iPod Nano that was a rectangle, and I had this album on it, and I just remember being in like 4th grade and being so depressed.
I can imagine you too with like the emo hair as well.
I went to Catholic school. I wasn't allowed it.
Oh God, that's even the tragedy deepens.
So I guess in terms of evaluate, I agree with what you guys say that Amy Lee, she's writing from a real place and she's writing from a very personal place, and she's got a very good singing voice. That is all I think you guys have identified those strengths perfectly. The biggest weakness here, I think, is the sequencing of this album, because after first four songs, it takes a sharp nosedive into mediocrity, I find. I think those first four songs are the big singles of this album, all of them. They were all the singles. And that level of sequencing speaks to me as something that's very corporate. It seems very
no doubt.
We got to move CDs. That's what that sequencing is, to the point where I think
fit Going Under on the Blade 2 soundtrack.
Imagine if this album ended with My Immortal. Just think about that for a second.
I mean, exactly.
Don't tempt me.
My Immortal should not be the fourth song on here, because that's the emotional low point of the album. That's the climax of the lows and the highs. That's the meeting point of that. And like, the sequencing just makes no sense to me, because you've got Hello randomly at track 9 and not at, you wouldn't push that out to 11 or something if you're going to have that kind of weepier, sadder ballad come back. It's really just that I think the record suffers from a great deal of these songs sounding too similar to each other, and the emotional tones being so just disconnected from each other. I do think that maybe even by accident, that Going Under into Bring Me to Life, that's a nice bit of sequencing. That's a nice little arc. But then into Everybody's Fooled, and you don't know what the fuck the tone is supposed to be.
Yeah, isn't it like a song about like, I don't know if it's about celebrity culture specifically, but it's like a song about fakeness, I think.
It's definitely a song about fakeness and artifice coming from another person.
And I think you could read that, I think, as a song about how maybe people who are abusive present themselves around people other than their victim. But yeah, I agree that it's like,
but you put that in between My Immortal and Bring Me to Life, and the emotional through line I don't think works.
I agree.
Like, that to me is the biggest downfall as an album, that it's it feels tiring by the end of it, because we are having this kind of really bumpy ride of similar but different enough tones and presentations of these songs that it doesn't feel like a necessarily concise experience overall. I feel this to be true. I mean, one, to be truly considered properly, we need, I think, first off, to really just evaluate what we want the story of the record to be, because the abuse narrative, you can follow that. I think even if you do, it feels disparate and kind of scattershot.
I think to Amy's defense here, I don't believe that she intended that to be how the album, at least she wanted the album to be read. It's like
August said, it feels like this was even sequenced by corporate people who were trying to market it, which I completely agree with. I think that's almost like, I don't know if that's even confirmed, but it feels that way.
It feels that way, and I can't get that out of my head when I'm listening to it.
I think it's funny that we do this immediately after our EPs episode, because essentially I think what August is saying is that Buried in Here is a genuinely very good EP. It's obviously not going to solve all of its problems, far from it. But if you take the core tracks here and you resequence them to be something with a more like developed through line, then you're actually cooking with gas here. Like, then it's a proper like experience that feels kind of honest, like, or at least more honest than what we ended up getting was.
You know what? So, I'm going to make a bold claim. We're going to sequence this album like Warren Zevon's self-titled album. and we're going to make it like this childhood to adulthood emotional development.
I think maybe the album that we're all looking for is, in fact, the record. I don't know if it was technically their debut album or not, but the thing they put out before this, which I've already alluded to, which is Origin, which I haven't listened to in full, but I checked out that alternate version of My Immortal. It's also got Whisper and Imaginary on it as well. And that record has a much sort of warmer, darker aesthetic that I think maybe the kind of thing that we're looking for. I can't speak to the quality and the flow and stuff, but yeah, I think that in as much as Fallen is a record that's hampered by issues outside the control of its lead creative force, I also think it's kind of unfair to at least labor those points too much, at least, especially in a kind of retrospective celebration of it. But yeah, it's a good record. It holds up. I think it represents so many aspects of its time, I think, even in its weaknesses. And as such, it's an important time capsule, and it's worth celebrating, even for its flaws, I think, for all that it represents about this era and for all that it gives us that no other band at this time were giving us in exactly this flavor. And God knows, I mean, how many bands it's influenced as well. Like, I mean, just about any.
Fallen's net good on the world is a far larger amount than I think most people would be willing to believe, frankly. Because once people knew that they could have, like, once studios and once, producers understand that this is a viable thing for them, they let way more people in the door on the ground floor of whatever this movie is going to be. I think we owe, the existence of shit like Paramore to this, probably.
Look, a lot of it is, I think, Amy Lee is a woman in a predominantly male-dominated genre and listening audience, and she as a front woman has excelled, and that's an incredible net good for the world of music, because that opens the door to more female creators, minority creators in general.
Absolutely.
If nothing else, you can take that as a good out of this.
Not even just like a male-dominated space, but like a male-dominated space where the status quo is hypermasculinity. Like, it's music that is not just
like almost comical at this point.
It's music that's not just by, and let's not forget, for men in terms of how it's marketed as well. It is music that excessively leans into sort of hypermasculinity in a lot of ways. And so it's doubly cool for that reason, I think.
Just one of those days.
Yeah.
Don't want to wake up. Everything's fucked.
Well, on that note, I think that it's time to go around, give our favorite tracks ratings.
Jake, lead us off.
Yeah, my three favorite songs on here are, I'm going to say Bring Me to Life and My Immortal. And I'm going to say that third place is tough because I like these songs about as well as each other. But I really like the songs both Imaginary and the closer Whisper. Imaginary just kind of goes, but I do think that Whisper is probably the third strongest track just because it has emotionality and it goes hard. So I'll go ahead and shout that one out too. My least favorite track on here is I'd say probably Taking Over Me, because it feels the most lyrically I don't really remember that much about it, frankly. So I'll bid that, and I'm going to give this album a 6.5, a very heavily flawed album that I am never not enjoying myself with. So take that for what it's worth.
All right. My three favorite tracks here are probably going to be Bring Me to Life, My Immortal, and Going Under. Least favorite is going to be Haunted. I would give it a 5 out of 10 myself.
My three favorites, I will say, I think Whisper's the best thing here, precisely for the synthesis that Jake has mentioned already, closely followed by My Immortal, and I will also say the opener, Going Under. Least favorite, also probably Taking Over Me. It's between that and Hello, which kind of sucks because, like, that's a well-written song, but it feels so redundant.
Yeah, why
considering My Immortal was like 3 tracks before that. I will give this a 6 overall.
Righty. My favorite songs are My Immortal, followed by Going Under. And I'm not going to put Bring Me to Life in the top three, even though I think it's a really good song. And the reason is like, even though I agree with you, Jake, that the integrated rap elements kind of become like an incontrovertible part of that song now, such that it sounds wrong not having it. I still think it holds the song back. And I still cringe
most assuredly
when I listen to it. So I will put in third place instead. I will put Tourniquet. My least favorite song on the record is My Last Breath. And I'm going to give the album a 6, which gives us an average overall of 5.9 for Evanescence's Fallen. Let us know at home. What do you think of Evanescence's Fallen? What is your relationship with the music of Evanescence? Do you have a nostalgic connection? How does this album hold up to you? What kind of experiences are tied to these songs for you? Let us know in the comments below. If you're on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rate and review. And if you want to let us know what you think, head on over to YouTube and leave us a comment too. We really love hearing from you guys, and all the interaction we get helps us to be able to keep making these videos. If you like what we do, consider subscribing to the YouTube channel if you have not already. And if you want to go above and beyond and support us even more than that, you can hit the join button. And just for $1 a month, you can support the channel, get your name featured in the title crawl of every video on this channel, get priority comment response, and if you want to recommend us some music to listen to, your recommendation will go to the top of the list. I'm so glad that August is finally here this week and I don't have to flounder looking for a slogan. So August, why don't you take us home?
All right. As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, CA Technologies. We can.